frankly, to do political work and to do organizing work and to do movement work, you have to be optimistic. You have to be radically optimistic. You have to be practically and strategically optimistic. To be entrepreneurial, you have to be optimistic. But now it doesn't always have to be me. The optimism is about us. We together can impact that change, but I don't have to be the one leading the charge at the front of that pack.
Hi, I'm Sally Christensen, the founder and CEO of Argent, a women's workwear brand. And this is Work Friends, a podcast for those who take their work, but not always themselves, seriously.
Work Friends.
Today's guest is Beth Lynk, the executive director of When We All Vote. Beth is a strategist and communications expert in campaigns, crisis communications, and strategic planning with experience working in healthcare, government, political nonprofit, and corporate environments. And as we're recording this, Beth and I have both just celebrated the launch of the Voting Suits You campaign, a joint initiative to maximize voter participation in the upcoming election in partnership with Argent and the nonpartisan voting organization founded by former First Lady Michelle Obama, When We All Vote. In this episode, Beth and I have a chance to share more about something we're both passionate about, voter participation, and I'm so excited to dig into her inspiring body of work, too. There's so much to get into, so without further ado, Beth Lynk. Hi, Beth.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I love your necklace.
Oh, thank you.
I love at the store today for the launch, we had really, I think, what was such an invitation to be childlike in a moment when it's serious. We're talking about voting and we're talking about, how to get involved in such a consequential election. But there's also a moment to be creative and pause and make your own voting necklaces and friendship bracelets. And that was just such a beautiful touch.
Yes, we've had a lot of time together today.
We
we had an event this morning to launch the partnership, which officially launched a few days ago.
Yeah.
And we'll continue through November 5th, and we're going to get into that for sure. But I loved the event this morning, too. And I think what you're saying is it delivered on like hope and joy and energy and levity. And those are all things I think people are really grasping on for right now. And it was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. And, I think it also was really nice because it brought together so many different types of folks from different industries, different walks of life, all engaged and energized around voting and around getting the word out and taking action. And I love what you put it. It was a very joyful space. Mm-hmm. And I think that, having joy in this moment and having celebration around voting not only, incorporates and encourages more people to vote and take action, but also is just necessary because there's a lot going on and everyone's holding a lot. And so it's when you can have those moments of joy and community, it's really great, which is why we're so excited to be partnering with y'all.
Yeah, it's a busy time. I agree with that. And yet there are these moments, and I think it's necessary that we really harness the power of connection, Yeah. But I also think, and this is what we're definitely going to dive into more, but there is a lot of excitement around just the opportunity to vote. Like I shared with you, I got my mail-in ballot this week, and it's really fun. And I feel like making that accessible has been your focus and When We All Vote's focus. And just trying to ensure that everyone has access. So without further ado, we always start the podcast with some icebreakers. So we're going to start today with some icebreakers. This week, have you had any big oh no moments and what were they?
Ooh, so one big oh no was I went to the wrong hotel. So I was getting in from the airport into New York this morning and I was like, okay, I'm going to go check in, change, went to the wrong hotel. And then I was like, oops, okay, well, we're just going to change right here in this lobby, and then we're going to make it on to the next event. But I love this question because I think sometimes, we internalize the oh no's. Oh, I got to have such perfection and precision in our lives. But, the oh no moments you got to laugh at yourself.
Yeah, that is so something I would do. Was it a very, how wrong is the hotel? How
so
far from where you
I went to the AC Times Square, but I'm at the AC downtown. So it was the same brand, but the gentleman at the front was like, No, we don't have your reservation. And I was like, you do have my reservation. Oh, you don't have my reservation. And that's okay. I'm going to gracefully bow out here.
I really struggle when my day starts like that. Sometimes it's like hard to reset for us. A lot of times it's like juggling the kids. And if it really goes sideways, like my day can start a lot later than I want, et cetera. So hopefully you recovered at our event and you're able
absolutely. Actually that is a good point. I think sometimes it's easier, and I think over time we all learn, right? Like a rhythm and a process to care for ourselves, whether that's working out in the morning or having routine. In a season like this, when we're so close to the election and spending so much time on the road and you're always traveling, routine just looks so different now. But I've also lately been learning how to do some of those gut checks to do, okay, how are you feeling now? We're going to do a temperature check, a pivot in the moment, and having spaces where, particularly community spaces that are just so celebratory and joyful, like the event this morning, are really good, reset moments to really lean in and engage and turn a day around.
I think sometimes it's wanting to control something and having like an expectation,
Yes.
And it's very, very much a part of the entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah.
And it's also part, I think, of like the activism that you do, when it's tied to a very clear milestone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's figuring out how to ensure that you are like living in balance, because there's just endless work to be done. But if you get too out of control or like you sort of aren't taking care of yourself, then, it's almost like working harder, but not necessarily smarter.
Yeah.
That's what I find.
No, 100%.
Okay. So, and before we get into your current job at When We All Vote, tell me about your first job, your worst job, and your dream job.
Ooh, that's a good one. So my first job was actually babysitting. So I was a babysitter for folks on my block and in my street, and taking care of some twins next door. But my first kind of job where I was getting a real paycheck, I was working at as a front desk staff at a community center called Kiwanis Recreation Center in Arizona. It's this big park and aquatics rec center where, there's lots of classes and activities. And I was just the gateway, the front of house, and the real conduit to help people kind of get from point A to point B. So that's first job. Worst job, that's a hard one. I would say worst job was probably when I don't know if this was worst job, but one of the jobs where I learned a lot was when I was working at California Pizza Kitchen as a server. And I think whenever you are working in front of house service, you juggle so much and you learn a lot about humanity and people and how to deal with different personalities and how to small talk and how to diffuse situations. So it was a lot of that in that role, but I think I learned a lot in those moments about myself and just patience and how to really just troubleshoot in those moments. Okay, first job, worst job,
dream job.
Dream job. I think I'm kind of doing my dream job right now. I always have wanted to engage and do work that matters and can be proactively making the world a better place. And I think the voter education and outreach work that we're doing now hits that bill in a really, really real way.
Yeah, I want to go back to the beginning because I actually think that talking about your story and your career path very much that will explain that answer as this being your dream job. To that end, where did you grow up and what were some of your first introductions to civics or government?
So I was born in Washington, D.C. I lived in D.C. until I was about 11, 12, but it was about fifth grade. And then we moved to Arizona. Growing up in the nation's capital, seeing my dad, who worked as a lawyer and worked adjacent to politics all throughout my time there and was very involved in the civil rights community and just very engaged in our local community, whether it was going to community meetings, doing service projects, or taking me along with him to do phone banking with NPR to ask people for money. If you ever do those phone-a-thons, imagine a 8-year-old me on the other side.
No.
Do you want to donate to NPR? Come, yeah. So I remember, going and doing that with him, and maybe that was violating some kind of child labor laws at that point. But who knows? Building character.
100%. I think that's great. Were you more successful as an 8-year-old? I feel like you're going to break through more as an 8-year-old.
I think I was pretty successful. I feel like, if I recall correctly, there was one of the times we were doing this phone banking, there was a competition between all of the different folks that were doing doing the outreach and making the calls. And I think I was, if not the top, the very close to the top. Yes.
I believe that. That's an effective fundraising strategy,
Exactly.
I feel.
So I grew up in DC, and I think Washington DC is such an interesting place on so many levels. One, it brings together so many different people from so many different walks of life that are focused on politics and ultimately working in service of making government work for people. However, you land on how to do that. But it also, as a DC native, and my grandmother was actually born in DC and lived in the Shaw neighborhood and went to Dunbar High School, if you're from the DC area, which was a very middle class, Black working neighborhood, and has deep roots in DC and in the kind of what was the Black Broadway of DC and that kind of main commerce area. And so, yes, you've got all these people that are coming from all these different places focusing on government. And then you have, long-standing community that have deep roots in DC and don't care a ton. I mean, care, of course, like we all do, about what is happening on the government side, but generally are just trying to live. And so you've got this melting pot of like the very political centered people and then the overall DC community. And I think it was really, we were fortunate to be able to sit at that intersection. So we were very engaged in the local community. My dad was very engaged in the DC Historical Society and wanted to make sure we understood that as we saw neighborhoods changing, this is what they looked like. These are the people that were there. This is how we can preserve history because history is important. This is how we tell stories, and this is the importance of storytelling. This is why it's important that we make our voice heard at a community meeting and have a story for the record, because this is how that will live on, right? Like that was very much a part, either explicitly or implicitly, about what I would see growing up, how I would engage with the world growing up. And then my mom, she's from Detroit, but and was one of the first classes to actually integrate her high school. And she works in healthcare, was working in healthcare in DC, and obviously very focused on that work and on making sure that we were full humans and being able to get that full experience. So it was very much growing up in DC, being fed into and told, all right, your voice matters. You are someone we want to hear from, someone we want to have engaged. And that meant a lot. So then when we moved to Arizona, it was not that any of that backbone changed, but the landscape and the who and the how and the deep-rooted connection to the community shifted. So at that point, I was around 5th grade. There are absolutely some very emo poetry about, oh my gosh, I'm going from this very lush green environment in the DC area, and now it's dry and I don't have any friends. But all the things that you go through as a 5th grader. But when we moved, it was also a real opportunity. And in that moment, and I will always remember my 5th grade teacher. I was new to Arizona. And all I wanted to talk about to anybody was, oh, I'm from DC. That's who I am. I'm from DC. This is what I did in DC. We used to do this, and we were doing a state project. And of course, I was like, well, I'm doing Washington, DC, because that's where I'm from. And he said, no, you're not. No one else in the class can, but you're going to do Arizona. And so I had to I was very mad about it. He's like, you have to do a project on Arizona. And what that did was 2 things. He's like, what you're also going to do is listen more than you talk, and listen and learn about this new place, about these new perspectives, about this new culture and community that you're now a part of and that you're engaging within. And I was very grateful for that reset and that reframe, because it really contextualized, yes, I knew a lot and I had a lot of assets and was coming into that space, but I didn't know it all. And in some cases, I needed to sit back and listen and learn. That was a really important and good moment, and I think set up a lot of the future ways that I approached my life moving forward at that point.
I actually think what your story speaks to, though, is a lot of us credit our parents with who we are.
Yeah.
A really undervalued part of our society are our teachers, and I am experiencing that now on the other side as a parent. And they just do so much, and they're so integral to all of our experiences and really shape who we are and have such an opportunity to encourage us and to just help inspire us. And so I think that that's also a nice part of your story. You had some pretty incredible experiences early on in your career. I'd love to hear about your first job, which I believe was working on the 2012 presidential campaign for Barack Obama.
That's right. So I was at Northwestern University in Chicago, well, outside of Chicago in Evanston, Illinois, if you know Northwestern. And I was in school in 2008 when President Obama was elected. At that moment, I had some friends in college who actually took leave to work on the 2008 campaign. And this was also as I was exploring my leadership and having some thought about, well, maybe policy or organizing or engagement could be for me. And as the administration started to form, yes, you had President Obama and Michelle Obama, who were historic leaders and exceptional people in their own right. But they also had a number of other historic young leaders, people of color. The receptionist of the United States was a deaf woman, right? And so like having all these barriers broken and people representing different things. And I was able to see myself in these roles in a different way. And it made me think about, okay, as I was having those conversations and thoughts with myself about how do I want to make the most impact on the world? How do I want to think about what that looks like? Am I being a doctor? Am I doing something else? I was like, I could do this. I could be a part of this. So after I graduated from college, I had an opportunity to go actually back home to Arizona and be an organizer. And this was really at a time when we were looking to build infrastructure, work with community organizations on the ground, start to do, power mapping and connect with the campaign, the communities and the people who wanted to have a voice in the process and engage and help do outreach. And it was a lot of me, literally, as a just fresh out of college, reaching out, some instances cold outreach, in some instances people that I knew from my time in high school and middle school in Arizona, saying, hey, can I talk to you about this work that we're doing, about President Obama, and sitting down over at a Starbucks or at a local coffee shop and hearing, okay, what do you care about? What is important to you? Here's how we are looking to support those issues and help fill some of those gaps. Just for context, around the same time, this was just after the passage of a bill called SB 1070, which was a law in Arizona that was essentially telling law enforcement, you can essentially racially profile immigrants and ask for identification at will. There was a huge backlash in that moment. And one of the things that was a result of that was a huge organizing structure, particularly led by people of color, by immigrant leaders, that in retrospect was changing the trajectory of organizing, outreach, engagement, and power in Arizona for the long term. I was feeling that. I was feeling just so optimistic about us, about our power, about our voice, and my power as an organizer, right? Like I was the best organizer possible, and I myself was going to, decide this thing. It was going to be me. Ultimately, with any campaign, resources have to be reallocated. I single-handedly did not turn the course of getting resources in that moment to Arizona. But so essentially, every campaign and every business has to make decisions about where resources go. And they were like, okay, no, Arizona is not going to be, a swing state in this one. And so I moved to Chicago, was doing some work at headquarters, and then also had the opportunity to work in advertising, which opened up a whole different set of skill sets and ideas. Yeah.
Advertising with
demand media. It was digital advertising. So publishing house that had a number of different online properties. Yeah.
I think we've talked about this, but I was at Grant Park
Were
2008
you really?
election night.
Oh my gosh.
They emailed me one of the tickets. It was like, it was a ticket with a +1 to go in. And I almost thought it was a fluke and remember that night so vividly. It was one of those moments. It was so obvious that history was happening. And it was just, I still remember when the election was called and just the celebration that took place and the outpouring of folks into the street. But I mean, it was historic for so many reasons. And to your point, that representation component, it's not just what happened at the top of the ticket. So one, I love that. Two, I love the young naivete that we have as 20-somethings, you know, and it's necessary to move, I think, work forward, that belief that we can do anything and we're just wildly optimistic.
Yeah.
It's necessary.
Well, one thing on that, earlier this week, I was in Chicago talking to some high school students and about why participating, getting registered to vote is important. And many of these folks were first-time voters. This school in particular had a election class that they do a seminar every year with the eligible students, and we're talking them through the process. So these folks were very engaged. And one of the students asked me a really insightful question to that point, which was, how do you think of yourself now that you didn't think about yourself when you were my age, right? 18 or 20.
Great question.
And it was very much similar to what we were just talking about. And for me, I took a beat, I thought about it, and I was thinking, well, I still have a lot of the optimism I had as a kid, as a high schooler. I think, frankly, to do political work and to do organizing work and to do movement work, you have to be optimistic. You have to be radically optimistic. You have to be practically and strategically optimistic. That's the way we move forward. And I think probably, to be entrepreneurial, you have to be optimistic. But one of the things that's so different in how I think of what I do now and who I am in what I do now versus then is, now it doesn't always have to be me. The optimism is about us. We together can impact that change, but I don't have to be the one leading the charge at the front of that pack. I don't have to be the person at the table, but what I do need to do is pull up a chair, at least for someone else, in some instances, combine tables and change the landscape, but then sometimes step back.
I think the best leaders can do that. I think the best leaders are able to scale their impact by building a team to do the work that maybe they were initially doing. But from having done the work, you know what it takes. And so it's easier to delegate, I think, once you get into your position. The most consequential election of our lifetime is on November 5th, and our futures are on the ballot. This election season, Argent and When We All Vote are proud to power the Voting Suits You campaign, a nonpartisan initiative to maximize voter participation in the upcoming election in partnership with Michelle Obama's organization, When We All Vote. Dressed in our iconic shade of pink, we want everyone to stand united for women and are asking you to join us in action. So check your voter registration, make a plan, and vote. Because when we all vote, we create the future all women deserve. Visit argentwork.com/voting suits you to learn more and get involved. I'd actually love for you to speak to organizing. How does one get into that as a career? And from my vantage point, good organizers, I mean, I think that's the hardest job in the world, to be honest. But I'd love for you to talk about, what that's like and what organizing even means for someone that's maybe aspiring to do that.
First off, I think that we are all organizers, particularly women, right? We organize our families, our friends. If you're organizing, girlfriends to go to brunch, right? You're an organizer in some ways. I think first and foremost, it's about, what do you care about when you think about the work and how to organize. The way that I think about organizing, generally speaking, is what do you care about and how can you really connect dots and connect people? And it's as simple as that. Often we're doing that already. We just don't put a label or a name to it. And it doesn't have to be hard. It can be really simple. And, I think we try to make it as simple as possible for the communities that we participate in, and as when we all vote, the resources that we are providing to our community members, our volunteers, our partners to turn, okay, I am interested in leaning in. Here are all the tools that you need. Go ahead and lean in. You got this. And also helping empower and show people, hey, you are already doing this. Now go run. In terms of as a career, I think that there's a lot of different ways to do this work. When I took that field organizing work and essentially is just talking to people, listening to people, hearing what they care about, and helping connect people and groups to each other so they can, and then getting out of the way so they can do the work themselves. When I started to take that work to think about, okay, how am I doing that on a larger scale and impacting more broadly, more nationally, it was, okay, what's the best way that I can do that? And I remember talking to a number of mentors and friends about, all right, how do I break into Washington, D.C.? Should I work on Capitol Hill? Should I work in advocacy? What's the best way to make an impact? Do I want to be a communicator? Do I want to be a policy person? Do I have to choose? And I remember asking a mentor that, and she said, well, a lot of people specialize, right? You can be a policy person, or you can be a comms person, or you can be an organizer. But the best leaders respect and understand each of those roles, learn a bit about each of those roles, and can be nimble and lean in where they're needed. And I took that to heart a lot about, how I moved my career forward. It was, where am I most needed right now? Is that doing crisis communications and being on the ground floor with healthcare, local Planned Parenthood organizations in the aftermath of fraudulently edited videos that were released and that started to put a real target on local Planned Parenthood affiliates' backs. And we started to see the burgeoning embers of the defund Planned Parenthood movement, which then turned into a full-blown defund Planned Parenthood movement, which then turned into what we saw in 2016, and then ultimately in the work to ensure that was defeated. In that moment, it was, comms, storytelling, impact, documentation, and amplification was what and where I needed to be. After that season, it was, I feel like there's an opportunity and I want to be a little bit more proactive. And then in that moment, organizing looked like, how am I getting back to doing that connecting work? And yes, keeping that storytelling, that impact documentation, but maybe I can be a little bit clearer about how we communicate. This is how democracy works so that we can plan for the future, so you can get the resources you want, the political power you want. Oh, let me go work on the 2020 census, which was not something I would have had on my bingo card in terms of what I was planning to lean into and engage around. But at the moment, when I was in a space where I frankly professionally was feeling like I was doing a lot of reactive work. I was just moving. I don't know if you ever feel this way, but like moving from crisis to crisis to crisis. And
no, never.
And I was like, I just really want to think longer term. And there's the census allows you to think, okay, 10 years in the future, or for the next 10 years, what are the money and the power that you want to bring to your community? But more broadly in that moment and in that space, it helped me think about what is from a resources perspective and from how can I work with, in that moment, we were working with historically undercounted populations and communities. And it was, yes, about get counted in the census. It's incredibly important. But it was also about why. It was about, this is how you get the money for education and schools and bus routes. And this determines the size of the pie that then, yes, gets divvied up depending on who you vote for. But start with what's the size of the pot that you're getting in your community. Similarly, with the number of, seats in Congress each state receives, and that ultimately gets divvied up by redistricting. That was a really good moment to think differently about, all right, I think campaign, organizing, movement work is where I'm needed right now. And then going into government was another pivot as well, but very much built on the trust and the organizing philosophy that I learned over each of those roles and honestly in each of those moments of transition too.
Yeah, I feel like your resume really speaks to the fact that you took the advice that you were given to heart, and you had experiences at Planned Parenthood, at the Rabin Group, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. Like you did a lot of work that it all makes sense, and I think it all really has come together nicely into your current role. I'd love to hear just maybe some backstory on how this opportunity came to you as the executive director of Michelle Obama's When We All Vote. I think that the census work that you're talking about doing very nicely dovetails into that need for everyone to show up and, and vote. But how did that opportunity even come to you?
I think I think many people feel this advice or see it in live action through the course of your career. But for me, it's so true that it is, yes, about the work I do, but it's about the person that I am when I show up at work, and it's about the people I do the work with. And part of that is because it's the people that I carry with me after. Yes, like you learn a lot from every single job, but it's really been about the relationships and the people who see me in the trenches and worked alongside me that can speak up in rooms where I'm not, and frankly, encourage folks to call on me and also help me and guide me to opportunities and places where I can make the most impact and have those conversations. So honestly, the way that this happened after I left the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, I worked in government for a bit in healthcare and housing, and I was at another moment where I was thinking about how can I be proactive and think forward. I think in moments of transition, we're always, it's like, okay, let me just put a toe out there. And a mentor pulled me aside and she was like, well, I know you know When We All Vote. I was like, I do know When We All Vote because When We All Vote has been doing incredible work since 2018 and has been really incredibly thinking about the intersection of culture and voting, and not just increasing participation in each and every election, which we do, not just closing the race and age voting gap, which we do, but it's changing culture as we do it. And that piece was just so exciting and so forward looking and just so special. It's frankly our superpower and of this organization and the superpower of our incredible team to bring voting to culture and ultimately bring that marriage together to think about how are we changing the course of democracy and the conversations around democracy, encouraging more people to join the conversation around democracy and participation, and then building that next generation of voters. And so she said to me, my mentor said to me, well, have you When We All Vote, have you considered going over? And I said, well, I don't know if I could be an executive director. I don't know. And at that point, I was the Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs at HUD, working under the amazing Secretary Marcia Fudge. And I was talking to some girlfriends over dinner, and I said, well, I think I'm going to have some conversations about this, but I don't know if I can do this. And they were like, absolutely, you can do this. And I think that brain trust of women and friends around the table that could put that mirror up when sometimes the mirror isn't really reflecting true for you was important to help me overcome a little bit of imposter syndrome, but also to help empower me to take on what is such a weighty role in a really important and weighty moment, and to step into that knowing that, yes, I got this and I can do this, but also knowing that I had so many women who had my back, so many people who had my back and were going to support me as I navigated this new role in such a critical season. And honestly, without that, I wouldn't have felt confident enough and ready enough to take on this role. When I started in March, I had those same women who had my back as I was going through and thinking about what I was going to do, hosted a welcome reception for me. And I remember telling them, I was like, I don't know if anyone's going to show up. And we had like 200 people there, right? So it was really an affirmation of that work. And I think sometimes we talk about imposter syndrome like it's a bad thing, but I think it's a reality and we all experience it. And it's something that having my community and my tribe with me to help navigate through that process is always just, I'm so lucky to have.
We talk about this on the entrepreneurial journey too. I've seen a lot of founders just start to doubt themselves because you're told no so many times and you're beat up so much. One person just telling you they believe in you and to go for it, it has such a significant impact. I mean, I'm so glad that you have that group of friends. But, oftentimes we have a tendency to, hold ourselves back or have that imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Everyone has it. I agree. Especially in, big moments like this, it can be daunting. And just to have that belief from someone where it's not crazy for you to go after this role.
Yeah.
And not only is it not crazy, you're now excelling in this role. It was part of the calculation, the fact that we are in the midst of election season, for better or worse. Like that probably attracted you to the job, but it was also more intimidating because of the stakes of this election.
The moment when I was preparing to take on this role, it was the early part of 2024. The issues at stake in this election have never been more clear and have never been more important as we think about who we are, how we participate, how we make our voices heard. And it was also in a moment when there were narratives going around where, young people are disaffected or not engaged or checked out. And I was feeling in that moment, and this was one of the moments I went back to data and research to confirm what I was feeling. But I was feeling in that moment, I don't think that's right. That's not what I'm seeing. And I remember as I was jumping into the role, I was also confirmed by the data that we had in-house. At that point in the year, we had thousands of people who were signing up to volunteer, just spontaneously saying, I want to take action. I want to lean in. I want to engage. That was really inspiring to me. And knowing that energy existed and having the opportunity, frankly, to be able to tap into that, but also to be able to share that we have 48 million young people, Gen Z, that are voting and eligible to vote in this election. 8 million Gen Z voters will vote in their first election this November 5th. That's exciting, or are eligible to vote. And I believe, we're engaging with them actively to ensure that they do participate. That was really inspiring to me, but it's also incredibly daunting to be like, okay, how are we tapping in? How are we thinking thoughtfully about this work in this moment? There was also a real, time is finite right now. We're just over 30 days away from Election Day. At that point, I had a little bit more time, but there's still a ticking clock when you step into a role like this in a moment like this. And so that urgency just being fueled by that, day after day. But I was so excited. And I think this is where the optimism comes through again, by just the incredible team that we had, the creativity, the energy, and the focus towards the goal, and just that commitment to doing this work and pushing it forward. And I think my mom told me a long time ago that if you don't have a little fear when you're stepping into something, then you're holding yourself back, right? And so you got to have a little bit of that, fire in your stomach, I'll say, to keep you on your toes.
Great advice. I love that advice. And just, I want everyone to think about it. The name of the organization is When We All Vote, but we've talked about this, we know that there are so many people, particularly people of color, who have been historically disenfranchised. And so knowing that voting is not equally accessible and that many people's voices aren't heard, how are you seeing this play out in the government? And is there anything that we can do to help change that?
Yeah. So just to actually think a little bit, just to back up for a second, all voters are obviously not a monolith, but there are 3 major ways and reasons why people don't vote. We try and address each of those, and we do that alongside our partners to ensure that as many people can vote as possible. The first reason people might not vote is logistical barriers or obstacles to voting. Now, have to acknowledge and state that some of that is intentional and some of that is targeted, particularly to voters of color and to young voters. And that is not a coincidence, it's voter suppression. And we know that, as we see additional voter ID laws be introduced, or fewer polling locations, or more efforts to purge voters from the rolls, those are efforts really to make it harder and to make it more of a process to vote. and to disincentivize you to do that voting. So that is very, very real. There are also some logistical barriers like I don't have a ride to the polls. I don't have childcare. I need time off from work to be able to vote. So both of those things are true. On the voter suppression side, one of the things I think a lot about is how voter suppression is intended to make us feel powerless. It's designed to make you feel, well, this is out of my control and I am not able to exercise my power. I don't know what to do. So where we can, and this doesn't excuse the fact that it is intentional and those barriers are systemic and exist and are real, and it's okay to be mad about that and it's okay to be frustrated. But what we can also do is say, all right, these are some of the ways that you can take some of that power back and take some of that control back. And so if you're worried about voter purges, for example, check your voter registration. If you're worried about how to get to your polling place or fewer polling places being in your city or your community, plan to vote early and plan that process. And we have a number of resources so people can find an early polling place if early voting is available near you, right? On the, logistical barriers and access to the polls piece, we're thinking about how are we helping get people to the polls? So for example, we partner with Lime to provide rides to the polls. And that can be, very helpful to get folks so that they can vote and remove that barrier. The second reason people may not vote is that they feel, well, my voice and my vote doesn't have power. It doesn't make a difference. One is to say, your voice and your vote have power. I see you. Clearly, you are dear to me and you are important to me. And I care about your voice and I want to see your voice represented in this country and ultimately to shape the future that you want to see for the world. Not to do it in a transactional way. I want you to vote because I want you to vote for this person. Oh, I want to vote. I want you to vote because I care about your voice and I think it has value. The second part is some elections have been decided in as few as 6 votes. That's just true. That's a group chat, right? That's a dining room table full of people around it. That's family. So that's real. And then the third part of that is what are the issues that you care about? Let's now talk about, it's not just about the top of the ticket, but let's talk about each position at the local level, at the state level, and yes, at the federal level, how each of those levels impact those issues that you care about. So for example, if you care about criminal justice reform, you care about your mayor because they appoint your police chief. You care about your attorney general because they're setting the standards for prosecution and criminal justice implementation like statewide in your state. And so there's many examples of that, but that's something that we talk about quite a bit. The third reason people may not vote is that they don't have the information that they need. They don't know the deadlines. They don't know how to request an absentee ballot or when. We have a complicated process in this country and it varies by state, and you have to pay attention to your dates and deadlines in your individual states. So we try really to fill that gap by providing a really robust voter registration hub on our website. And of course, we're partnering with you all to make sure that people have those resources readily available. So on the Voting Suits You page, we have a hub with those resources so that you can find those dates and deadlines and share that with your communities. That's really why partnerships like this are so important to help amplify the message of vote, yes, but also put those resources in people's hands in a way that you're going to pay attention to it and not be overwhelmed. It's okay, this is digestible, easy information in a bite-sized piece that you can really take and then share.
Okay, so we've touched on it, but we haven't actually given a backstory on our partnership, which is Voting Suits You. It's something we've partnered with you all in the past. In 2022, we came together to make some merch and to, again, try and use our platform in a way that helps amplify the work that you're doing. This year, we came together, and for us, we wanted to partner with you all because we respect the work that you're doing so much, with the vision of bringing our pink suit back into an election cycle. We launched it in 2020, brought it back in 2022, and now had a vision of doing that again in 2024 with the introduction of an ally suit to involve more people in the conversation and to leverage our platform. And the product is sort of this visual unifier. And so the campaign launched on October 1st. It runs through Election Day. There are a lot of moments within the campaign that are simply designed to just raise awareness of When We All Vote, the work that you're doing, and plug them in. I mean, for us, you all are a dream partner, and I think that a lot of it has to do with, all the work that you're speaking to and the expertise that you have. I'm curious to know why voting suits you and the pink suit, like what your thoughts are in terms of how that's been an effective campaign for When We All Vote's work.
So when the first part of the conversation was created and germinated, I was outside of When We All Vote at the time and watching and appreciating from outside. But it was a conversation and that you pulled together in DC with leaders to talk about voting suits you and amplify, frankly, the leaders that were on the front line of that work in that moment, leading up to the midterms. And from that, when we think about partnerships and we're thinking about how we can amplify voting, voter registration, voter education work, and we're thinking about who is the right people to do and amplify that work. It's one, how can we increase and diversify the people who are talking about voting? And how can we celebrate it and make it joyful? And I think that there's no better place, frankly, than Argent and you to help work and lead that. We are really grateful, and the launch was such an exciting moment where we were able to see so many leaders, from celebrities to activists to movement leaders and movers and shakers, be able to show up looking good, feeling good, and talk about an issue and the issues that they care about, that they are passionate about, and ultimately that are making them want to take action and vote this year, and to inspire and pass that on to others, which is a big part of what we are always asking for folks to do. It's like, check your voter registration and now ask 3 people you know to do it, and do that right now. So I think the approach that you all take to storytelling and empowering and lifting up people is exactly in line with the way that we think about this work, and we think about how we're changing culture around voting, how we're increasing the voices that are talking about this issue, and ultimately how we turn a corner longer term. And then I think the other piece for us that really excites me is, we were talking as I was walking in to sit down for this interview, is that we often are thinking about what we put on our body, what we, as women, if you wear makeup, what you put on your face, or how you look and how you feel has a huge indicator of how I perform in the workplace, how I feel, and my confidence as I'm moving through that place. And in a moment when you may have anxiety or fear about this election, putting on a suit of armor, putting on a pink suit, putting on something that proudly and boldly shows, hey, I am here, and, voting suits me and voting suits you, but it doesn't back away, but is so bold to put that out there, is really exciting, and exactly about that celebratory moment and armor that we need to move forward and proudly, be visible and vote. Some of the folks this morning were talking about being on the train from New Jersey in their pink suits, and people were giving them like looks and giving them compliments. They're like, this pink suit is not my New York normal black.
On my way here, I was standing in the subway station, and a woman takes her phone and shows it to me, and she said, were you at this event? And she's looking at a story of our event.
Oh my God.
From someone that was at the event this morning. And I said, yes, I was. We started a whole conversation. We exchanged information. We're going to get together in LA next week.
I love
but
that.
There is something really powerful, I think, in the visual. I think the reason that I'm so excited to partner with you all is because you do a really nice job including culture, sports, business leaders, celebrities, but like you're just looking at this intersection that I think is nuanced, and it's reaching such a broad audience. And so that really excites me because I feel like it's a really fresh perspective that's having impact. So shifting gears, before we go, we are going to play my favorite game of Would You Rather.
Okay.
It's easy and fun and just go with what your gut tells you.
Okay.
Would you rather stay organized digitally or only write everything down with pen and paper?
Pen and paper. I like the practice of writing it down.
Same. I think that's generational. Everyone that I ask that's our age-ish, and I like to say our age, it's I feel like we all say that. I think digitally is maybe Gen Z.
I also think it's incredibly satisfying to be able to actually physically cross things off the list.
Yes, it's so sad that I write to-dos I've already done and then cross them off, but I do it.
No, sometimes you need that to give yourself a little boost and say, all right, I've moved this thing forward.
To get started on the rest of the list.
Yes.
Would you rather have a meeting at 8 a.m. on a Monday or 4 p.m. on a Friday?
So 8 a.m. on a Monday. Friday 4 p.m. is a tough one for me.
For context, we're recording this at 4 p.m. on a Friday.
Exactly.
Which is so great.
But with you, 4 p.m. on a Friday is absolutely a delight and a great time.
It is funny. It definitely depends on what the meeting is. Would you rather write a great piece of feedback or receive a great piece of feedback?
Ooh, that is a good one. I would like to write a great piece of feedback because I like to see the team light up and grow. And I would actually even say it's not necessarily even positive feedback. Sometimes it's a, hey, this was a learning moment and I know you can do this. And here's a few ways that we're going to tackle this next step together. And then on the other side of that, seeing that team member or staff member take that advice and run with it and grow and just shine. Oh, there's no better feeling.
I already knew this, but I've decided during this conversation that you're an excellent leader. All your answers are so great. Like there's a lot that's revealed in this conversation that I feel like speaks to your leadership. Would you rather be the oldest person in the office or the youngest?
Oh, that's actually very funny. I'm this role, we really mean it when we say we are of the culture. So we have a very young team, and I am one of the oldest people on the team, which coming from government was a complete 180. There was a role, my second role in government, I was in an executive level role overseeing communications and outreach for the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And I was the youngest and the only kind of person of color on that team. And it was a really interesting moment because, you think different, the conversations look different and the way that you operate looks different. Now I am one of the oldest and we have some tremendous Gen Z leaders that are stepping up and really changing the playbook and challenging us as millennial bosses to think differently about the work in, I think, in some ways, really healthy ways, in some ways, challenging status quo in a way that can be hard. But it also requires you to think differently about how you show up and how you engage and when to step up and when to step back.
Would you rather have coworkers who type very loudly or speak very loudly on the phone?
Ooh, both of those things are horrible. I would say type very loudly because speaking very loudly is hard to think over.
It's a lose-lose for me. Would you rather be late to a meeting where you're presenting or where your boss is presenting?
That's funny. Well, my boss is Michelle Obama, so I can never be late to anything. So that is not so I've just got to be late to what I'm presenting, and that's the way it's going to go.
Would you rather wear a full pink suit or mix it up with merch?
Ooh, I would mix it up with merch when I'm in community and out in the field because it's just fun, and then you can bring in your own personal style. Generally, my armor in my suit though would be just the full pink suit because in DC we've got a uniform.
You'll certainly stand out in this pink.
I will.
Would you rather phone bank or knock on doors?
Knock on doors because it's harder to slam a door in someone's face, and I'll smile at you. I'll invite you. I just want to hear your story and I want to talk to you. So yeah,
I share that. And lastly, would you rather vote by mail, vote early, or on election day?
I would rather vote by mail because it allows me to plan and think about my responses and answers. Voting isn't a pop quiz, and you can actually get your ballot ahead of time by going to ballotready.com, and you can pull your ballot, look and see all of the things on your ballot, and do that research before you go into the polling place. Because again, we're not just voting for the top of the ticket, you need up and down the ticket. And sometimes you'll see names or ballot measures or issues that you aren't as familiar with. But for me, being able to sit at the kitchen table, do the research, step away if I need to, think about it, and then ultimately get it in by the deadline is great. Personally, the reason I like to vote by mail is that the first time I voted, and for the few years after that when I was in college, I was voting in Arizona, because when you're a college student, you can make the choice to vote where you go to school or at home. And during fall break was normally when I'd go home to vote. And we would make a practice to vote as a family at the kitchen table. And so we'd all vote by mail at the kitchen table. And then my mom would go and mail them all in. And so I always think about that when I'm voting by mail.
I think technically I like the ceremony of voting in person.
I do too. Yeah, that's
But
true.
I vote by mail because I think, to your point, I like to sit and do my research too. And I'm going to go vote tonight. So I've got my ballot.
Oh, that is a great way to end this conversation.
Yep. I'm so excited. It's been like the highlight of my week to have received that this week of all weeks.
Yes.
And so Dave and I usually do it together at the kitchen table. We do end up voting the same, but it's not intentional. We're not like making the same decisions just because we have to, but we're more aligned. But we do it together and research together and make sure we understand everything together.
Love that.
Yeah. Sometimes
family that votes together,
Yeah, but it gets wordy sometimes where it's like it's intentionally opaque and confusing. So you do really have to research. Beth, thank you for your partnership. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your work. A remarkable career, but I think that your current role is so incredibly important, especially this election season.
Well, thank you so much for being incredible partners, for thinking thoughtfully and creatively about how we lift the women that are doing this work and amplifying the message, and for frankly walking the walk as much as you talk the talk in terms of arming women in power to talk about our future and vote. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Work Friends, a podcast from Argent. Listen and follow on all podcast platforms and subscribe to the Argent YouTube channel for more clips and bonus content. Plus, email your work questions and dilemmas at workfriends@argentwork.com for a chance to have one of our amazing guests weigh in with advice. I'm Sally Christensen, and we'll see you next time.
Work Friends.
Work Friends is produced by Gina Marinelli with editing by Justin Kropp. Our theme music is by Karina DePiano and Melanie Naima.